So we're now going to turn to the substance of the panel. What I'm going to do is read the bios of our three panelists, and we're running this as a question and answer, as a conversation, as opposed to just slide presentations. So hopefully you'll find the interaction interesting. We'll monitor the chat room for your questions. I will have a series of 5 questions I'll ask the panelists in turn, and then following that, we'll open it up for general discussion, and hopefully we'll have plenty of time for some good interaction. So first, Dr. Mary Bowman is the acting director of the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. And she's also the acting director and deputy director of BEA. Dr. Bowman works with BEA's executive team to expand the agency's statistical programs and to shape the highest priority research projects in furthering BEA's mission. She's collaborating with BEA's researchers to bolster the impact and the effectiveness of BEA research, and she has led the way in crafting a strategy to position BEA to be an employer of choice for years to come. Before joining BEA, Dr. Bowman spent more than 20 years with the Department of Agriculture in numerous positions, leaving her mark on research involving international trade, farm competitiveness, and data-driven policymaking. She received a doctorate from the Department of Agricultural Economics at the University of California, Davis, and earned a bachelor's degree from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. Ron Jarmin is the Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer of the U.S. Census Bureau. He performs the non-exclusive functions and duties of the Director from July 2017 to January 2019, and previously served as the Associate Director for Economic Programs. He led the team for the 2017 Economic Census, overseeing a move to 100% internet data collection and leveraging enterprise investments to minimize system, application, and dissemination costs. Data products from the Economic Census provide the foundation for key measures of economic performance, including the nation's gross domestic product. Ron holds a PhD in economics from the University of Oregon, and he's an elected fellow of the American Statistical Association, having published papers in the area of industrial organization, business dynamics, entrepreneurship, technology, and firm performance, urban economics, data access, and data disclosure avoidance. And as we always are fond of saying, we don't want Ron's job. Dr. William Beech is the Commissioner of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, my former boss for about a week and a half, I think, before I left the Bureau. Bill became the 15th Commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics on March 28, 2019. Before joining BLS, Dr. Beech was Vice President for Policy Research at the Mercatus Center at George Mason's University from February 2016 to March 2019. Before that, he served as the Chief Economist for the Senate Budget Committee, the Republican staff from 2013 through early 2016. Among his other professional positions, he was a Lazoff Family Fellow in Economics at the Heritage Foundation and the founder and director of the Foundation Center for Data Analysis. Prior to joining Heritage in 1995, Dr. Beech served as senior economist in the corporate headquarters of Sprint United in Kansas City. He's a graduate of Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas, has a master's degree in history and economics from the University of Missouri, Columbia, and a PhD in economics from Buckingham University in Great Britain, where he is a visiting fellow in economics. So with those bios as background, let's start with the Q&A. And the first is, I would just like to ask the panelists if they could provide us an update on their current budget situation for your respective agencies. Are there aspects of the budgets that are of particular interest to our audience, to the states? Let's start with you, Ron.
Well, obviously, for the Census Bureau, the year ending in 0 is our most peculiar budget year in the sense that it's our peak budget. So, you know, I think right now we are in good shape. You know, our budget authority this year is something like $7.9 billion, with some of that coming from last year. We have enough money, I think, to be able to do all of our operations for this fiscal year without any major issues. And that includes having to, you know, replan field activities for the 2020 census because of the COVID pandemic. So we've pushed all of our field activities back. Obviously, right now that's saving us money, but you know the decennial money is multi-year money, so we should be able to make whatever activities we have to do in the next fiscal year, we'll be able to do that as well. But this was largely because we were able to, working with the Department of Commerce, able to get a request that was approved by the Congress for a sizable contingency for this. So we're going to eat into that because of the replan of the census, but I think we're in good shape, and there should be even enough left if we have to deal with a hurricane or something like that. Given that our field, our non-response follow-up data collection is going to be occurring across the country during the hurricane season and during the season of wildfires and what have you. So I think from a budget standpoint, we're in pretty good shape. Obviously, that outlook starts changing as we move away from the census. So we're working hard, to do some planning for the out years to make sure that we can continue all of our ongoing programs, as well as starting to get ready for the 2030 census as well.
Great. Bill, what is your perspective for BLS?
I think we're also in pretty good budget shape right now. We have 655 million come through the last appropriations. That would look large if you've been following us over the years, but it does include one-time money, 27 million to help us with this year's relocation, which is a multi-year relocation from the office we have, the national office we have near Union Station, to the Suitland Federal Center, where the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Economic Analysis are already located. So when BLS gets there, if we do, and I think we will, in early 2022, then you can imagine to use Buckminster Fuller's famous term, the synergies will be just amazing. I'm looking forward to that. We did not get any COVID-related stimulus money. So some people have asked me about that. But that's all right. We're operating okay without that. In addition, the FY21 budget request that President has submitted gives us 658.3 million for BLS, and here's something I'm particularly interested in conveying. Among the additional activities we have had requested for us by the President, 7.1 million to expand our job opening and labor turnover survey, commonly known as JOLTS. So we're going to have a big expansion of the sample to produce sample-based estimates in every state, as opposed to model-based estimates as we now have. And that increased sample would allow us to do a lot more detail, ask a number of new questions. We're going to really get into the demand side of the economy in a very large way. Mike is smiling because he knows about this survey. And it is so important. So I'm hoping, and this will terrorize my other BLS colleagues if they're listening, that we will get to a point, Mike, where we can produce the JOLT survey and the employment situation survey in the same month for the same reference period. So that would be terrific, because then we would have the supply side and the demand side there. I will highlight something. I haven't announced it yet, but let me announce it right now. We will be producing this summer, and we're in the summer months, brand new JOLTS estimates for 18 metropolitan statistical areas. And those are about to come out, and I'll let everybody on the call know when that's to happen. But that is made possible by the fact that we already survey in those 18 areas. Those 18 areas cover about 40% of all workers in the United States. So I think that'll be very interesting to see what the JOLTS results are for those MSAs.
So Bill, I'm just anticipating one thing in the chat. If you're successful in getting money for JOLTS expansion at the state level, that might mean that a combination of sample and modeling would allow you to do JOLTS underneath the state level?
Yes, that's the hope. So the MSAs that we're doing now are sample-based because of the way in which we have divided the country up in order to take samples in certain parts of the country, so as to get a representative sample across the entire United States. But with the doubling of our sample size, we're going from roughly 16,000 observations to about 40. and a doubling of our staff. We'll open up a new staff center in Kansas City to complement the JOLT staff center, which we have in Atlanta. We think that we will be able to take the top 50 MSAs and make sure that we have observations in every one of those. Now, what's really cool about this is that it also allows us to get down into the industry detail in every state as well. And that then will marry to the wonderful data which is coming out of Census at the state level and has industrial coding, usually on an annual or a quarterly basis. So imagine what we'll be able to do when we begin to merge these data sets, the demand side of the economy with what's happening with the administrative data from Census. And I can just imagine what Mary wants to do with these data, because they should really help inform the NIPA tables and the special project activities that Mary's involved with.
So Mary, you are the ultimate consumer of federal data. I would describe BEA as. What does your budget situation look like?
Well, thanks, Mike. And I agree with Bill. More data is good news. And, we're building out our county level data. So there's a lot of opportunity in the future. But for FY 2020, BEA is also in good shape with an appropriation of $108 million, an increase of $7 million over 2019. And it funds our core programs and two new activities. The first being production of GDP statistics for Puerto Rico, and second, progress towards establishing a federal data service to make more of the federal data available to researchers, and we're doing this in close coordination with Census. And then in an administrative move, which is quite significant, the budget recognizes the merger of BEA's industry and national directorates. And this was an important milestone towards accelerating our release of quarterly GDP numbers. And we remain on track to publish a simultaneous look at GDP by national level, state, and industry at the end of September for the third estimate of GDP. And I can see this being especially valuable in these times to be able to look at different slices at the same time.
And Mary, how is oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was just wondering, you mentioned the county GDP. What has the reception been for that?
Very positive. We had, the NACO state level interest. We've had a lot of outreach about, what's in the statistics. There's, a good amount of industry detail, I think around 20 industries, and people, we've gotten really overwhelmingly positive response. But for 2021, the president's budget has $112 million, an increase of $4 million that continues these programs for our core programs, expanding GDP for Puerto Rico, and ongoing support for the data service and the evidence-based policy making work.
Excellent. So I'd like to turn the conversation to COVID, which I know has been a conversation we've all been having constantly for the past 2 months. But specifically, I'd like to look at how COVID-19 has affected your operations in a couple of different dimensions. One is, does it affect how you collaborate with your state and your other partners? So for example, your ways of running national conferences, or your plans for even having national conferences. Your meetings with advisory groups, of which I know there's a lot of state partners who come regularly to the advisory meetings that you folks have. And of course, probably more core to your business model, how is the move to a world of virtual interactions affecting your data collection operations, including the decennial census? Let's start with Bill, and then we'll turn to Ron and Mary.
Well, this gives me a great opportunity, Mike. Thank you so much for the topic, because one of the things that I've done during this pandemic is make the LMI shops in the key states, the large states, and in many other states as well, a part of the I guess you might say, economic information highway. And let me explain that. So in late March, I began to reach out to LMI folks in New York, Michigan, California, Pennsylvania, Florida, to ask them, what's going on in your state? What's happening to labor markets? Remember, we had a free fall collapse in labor markets in March. Nobody really, in late March, no one really knew what was going on, but the LMI folks did. They had a better sense of that than anyone else. That resulted in weekly conversations with a number of folks. All that information was then moved up to the Secretary of Labor, who moved that information up the chain to all the decision makers that needed to have that information. And I want to tell you, that was really, really valuable, particularly valuable then when we began to work with the states. Now, so many of the state operations just weren't prepared. They had, well known now, inadequate UI systems, which became adequate over time. A lot of state offices, especially those that we interacted with through the federal state programs that BLS is involved with, just didn't have the telework capacity. So we had to do a lot of things as a statistical agency to help the state stand up operations so that they could provide information through the LMI network, through our local regional centers, the regional BLS offices, in through the national office. That was really interesting. I told the story this morning, and Ron and Mary have already heard about it, of the key thing that we were lacking in late March. It wasn't desktop computers or laptops. I mean, we had plenty of those, and we found them in closets. We found them everywhere. I mean, I think a lot of those are surplus property that should have been sent to the Department of Labor a long time ago. But there seemed to be a lot in your old closet, Mike. So I'm not going to get you too much trouble, I hope. But the thing we lacked was power cords. We couldn't find power cords for these out-of-date computers that we were able to reshape. And finally we did, and so there's a happy ending to that story. We helped, and the LMI folks helped get a lot of work done to help the UI systems get well. That's been a real strong but completely unnoticed aspect of BLS and the LMI shops. There's been a lot of work, and it's been different in every state. I have weekly meetings with the folks from California, and I'm going to embarrass them now, but Amy Faulkner and her group out there have just been outstanding, doing some innovative work on who's the vulnerable population, the interaction between the PUA program and the regular UI benefit program, helping us understand in our collection efforts what the difference is between those who are looking for work and those who are coming in through the UI system, what the percentage of those with reduced hours. These are very arcane questions, right, that have to be answered if the policy is going to be right. And my weekly meetings with that group and with groups in Michigan and New York, Pennsylvania, have just been wonderful. So I just want to say that, of course, we've done a lot at the national office. We've gone from completely on the price index side. We have stopped all in-store collection. We're now collecting through video links, through email, through any number of non-human contact sources. Our response rates are lower, but we're noticing that we're not suppressing detail at any greater degree now than we were before the pandemic, at least so far in the price system. On the household survey, Ron can talk about that. We had a nice discussion this morning in another meeting. Ron has taken everybody out of the field. And so for the current population survey, which is so central to our labor market information that comes out every month, we've not had in-person contacts with those householders. But even so, we are able to report collection response rates in the mid-60s and low 70s, which, as you know, are not quite up there around the 80% rate where you want them to be, but they still provide for enough activity. When we're looking at the business establishments, it just has surprised me. We're looking at response rates at the business side through innovative work that we've done, non-personal contact work, which is only a few percentage points off the regular averages that we get in the pandemic period. So whatever we've done, and a lot of this credit has to be with our field operations office and with the regional BLS offices, we've been able to continue to do the work in a 100% telework platform with our respondents not interacting with us in an in-person basis. I am amazed by that, but it so far has done pretty well. Now, I'll conclude here. If it's true that in today's report gives an indication of that, the jobs report I'm referring to, that we may have seen kind of the worst job numbers for a while behind us. I don't know about the future, but at least in the worst ones, then maybe we will have some more in contact work and we'll see our response rates rise. We really can't see much more decay, Mike, in response rates, or we are going to have to, reduce the detail in our reports.
Yeah, and I know the reopening of the economy and that weighing the risk between doing that and just the risk of COVID is a very important conversation. Ron, what is your perspective, especially with the decennial as well as your sort of day-to-day, month-to-month survey operations?
So, obviously this has had a huge impact on us. And so like everybody else, we ourselves have moved to 100% telework operation. For our headquarters staff, that has not been a huge impediment to getting work done. In fact, maybe it's even helping us. The Census Bureau has been very productive during this time period. But where it has caused things, and Bill alluded to this with our interviewers out in the field on our current surveys, obviously we pulled them out of the field. They're not doing household visits right now, but they are calling folks, over the phone and still taking responses to the survey that way. In terms of the decennial, however, this is a colossal impact. So it's forced us to push, non-response follow-up operations, which should be ongoing right now. We're looking to start those back up in mid-August. So we closed our almost 250 area census offices around the country. We curtailed our hiring activities for the hundreds of thousands of enumerators that we need to go out and do non-response follow-up. But just as importantly, while we were in the middle of the self-response phase, all of our partners across the country, hundreds of thousands of partner organizations that were planning to do events and to get out and promote self-response in particular for the census, they weren't able to do those. And so that was something that we were quite concerned about. But I think, with some tweaks to our ad campaign and some innovative, clever ways by our partners to look at different ways of reaching out to folks, either through social media or email blast and that sort of thing. We've managed to get the self-response rate up to 60.5%. Actually, I think 60.7% today. Already, and that was what we were shooting for when we start non-response follow-up. So, without it as robust of a partnership activity, we were able to achieve that. But I think, where the impacts are felt not just with folks out in the field doing interviews is, our National Processing Center in Jeffersonville, Indiana, where we mail, first contacts for surveys, and we capture the data for paper forms, where a lot of outbound and inbound phone calls are done. Those folks have not been able to be on site for a good part of the past several weeks, and that's had an impact on things as well. So all of these things, I think, Bill alluded to, response rates are a little bit down for our business and household surveys. I think some of that's from not being able to have in-person contact. Some of that's just because people, are outside of their normal routine. But I think, we've been able to keep things going well enough that the data are, still fit for purpose. And we've been able to push data out to our users, to our colleagues at VLS and BEA. So I think, to a large degree, we've done quite well. We've replanned field operations for the 2020 census, you know, several times during the past few weeks. And we've also been able to do a lot of things in response to the pandemic to get new data in the hands of users, both through enhancing some of our existing surveys, so our data products. So we have an administrative database program called the Business Formation Statistics that gets very timely information on applications for employer identification numbers and has a model behind it that sort of predicts how many of those will become businesses, how many of those will become businesses that hire employees. And that was a quarterly release product before, but we've increased that to a weekly cadence, and it's had, you know, huge uptake by economists trying to get some real-time data. But we've also introduced 2 new surveys that we conceived of and fielded, I think, you know, in like 40 days time, something like that. So the small business pulse survey and the household pulse survey, we don't intend these to be permanent. These are really here to address measurement needs for timely data during the pandemic. But people have been using those data. They were even getting, so the jobs numbers came out this morning, and on Twitter, people were trying to line up the pulse surveys with the jobs numbers, and so, you know, I think people are really the timely data in a time of crisis is really what people are looking for, and that's what we've said all along. You know, whenever people talk to me about how to improve the data, it's always 2 things: it's more timely and more granular. So we really were trying to address that need for timely data during the crisis with that. So we've been very pleased. You know, the staff that worked on those projects very energized. But, you know, now we know that we can do that. So their expectations have been increased. So you know, we'll be looking for other opportunities to do things like that in the future. So with that, I'll let Mary go, and then we can do more.
Rod, a quick follow-up. You mentioned that the non-response survey follow-up has been delayed until August. Is this then extending the time period, the time frame for the census?
Yeah, so absolutely. So we've, you know, we were to be getting out of the field the end of July before, you know, maybe bleeding into a little bit of August, but now we're looking to be out of the field by the end of October, sooner if we can. But that's going to mean that, you know, 2 months is not enough time to process the data and produce the apportionment counts and get ready to do the redistricting numbers. And so, you know, Census and the Commerce Department have put forward a request to extend, you know, to get statutory relief from the 12/31 deadline. And it seems like there's good support on both sides of the aisle. I mean, everybody understands you can't have hundreds of thousands of people out in the field during a pandemic. You know, we really focus on the safety of our staff, the safety of the public, and you know, there's no, you know, that was the wise thing to do. No one's arguing that. So there is going to have to be an extension. And for some states, you know, Virginia, I think New Jersey, states that have elections in the 1 year, you know, that's gonna pose an issue for redistricting and stuff like that. So we're working to try to accelerate things as best as we can, but you know, you can only do what you can do. So,
Mary, do you have a data collection perspective? But also, I'd be anxious to hear about what you're doing with your advisory committees, for example.
Sure, Mike. And let me just start with how we're operating. BEA is all in Suitland, and we've been under 100% telework since the middle of March. We're releasing all our statistics as you would normally see them, with some, you know, additional documentation on the COVID impacts. About 20% of the data we use in GDP comes from BEA-run surveys of multinational companies. And we're also in the middle of a benchmark year for one of our surveys. So it's a busy time. So far, we're getting enough information in and doing follow-up with some of the most important, you know, firms that report to us. So we think we're okay. and we will, be releasing our products with, similar to BLS and BEA, full information about what we know about the data we've collected. But as you mentioned, we're a huge consumer of data in the federal government, and we have spent a lot of time working with our colleagues, especially BLS and Census, to understand changes in source data and share our thinking about data adjustments and methods. And notably, and thanks to Census's economic directorate, there's a weekly call among the economics agencies, BLS, the Federal Reserve, BEA, and other statistical agencies to discuss the status of the indicators. So that's been really valuable. And we've also held in-depth discussions on specific topics such as the joint BEA BLS productivity account. So as big data consumers, that's been a huge part of our outreach to understand what we're getting. And so far, the quality has been very good. We're also working through the OMB Interagency Council on Statistical Policy that Bill is leading right now. And Bill has set up 3 groups to look at how COVID is impacting statistical operations, data collection, and then I'm leading a group on innovation in the statistical system where we're collecting information and documenting what's been done around new products. And Ron has mentioned a couple Census has out, and we'll be putting that together to share experiences and be available, I think, if there's another pandemic or crisis, but also we can all learn and move things forward irrespectively to do new things.
Mary, you went on mute. There you go.
That should be, yep. Thanks, Mike.
Sure.
You mentioned advisory committee meetings. We have become huge power users of WebEx, and we've had multiple meetings. We had our first BEA advisory committee that was entirely remote in mid-May. We had 12 of our 14 members join us. I don't know if that was a record because we don't, but it had to be close to it. And we had double the general audience we have on a typical in-person meeting in Suitland. And really robust discussion on how we were responding to COVID and new statistics we're producing on the distribution of personal income. We also had a virtual all staff meeting and we had 400 people join. That's, 80–90% of BEA staff and contractors. Great questions about how we're operating and what's going to happen in the future. And then going forward, next Friday, June 12th, we have the FESAC, the Federal Economic Statistics Advisory Committee, which provides advice to Bill, Ron, and I about economic statistics. So same kind of thing.
Sure.
Anyone can join. You can still sign up. If you Google FESAC, it's on the BEA website. So I think that, we've been able to innovate. We miss seeing each other, but I agree with Ron that our staff have just been hugely entrepreneurial and willing to solve problems, and we've been very productive during this period.
That's awesome. Bill, is the LMI National Conference being held this year?
Well, I don't think we're going to hold it, but if we do, we'll hold it using one of Mary's power user WebExes. So that is still up in the air. I think we'll have news on that very, very shortly, Mike.
Okay. All right, let me turn the discussion to data quality, because I think one of the concerns that we have is, we've had such remarkable changes in economic activity, whether it be unemployment insurance claims, the PUA program, the unemployment rate, what's going on with retail sales. It's just been massive changes throughout the economy. And I'm wondering if the current situation raises any specific concerns about data quality. And I'm thinking in particular about issues related to things like low response rates, or, for example, measurement issues in the CPS. I think, Bill, I applaud you guys for being so straightforward in your press release text about talking about the potential misclassification error of folks being classified as employed but absent rather than unemployed.
Right.
And I think that's been a breath of transparent air, if you will. But I'm wondering, just from your perspective, are there particular issues that you're thinking about? Other things like detection of outliers for seasonal adjustment, birth-death models. The list goes on. So I'll give you guys a chance to talk about it. And Mary, why don't we start with you this time?
Sure, thanks, Mike. And let me just talk about this in the context of our first quarter release for GDP, our preliminary estimate at the end of April, our second estimate at the end of May, and then we started releasing monthly personal income numbers that deal with the COVID period, most recently for April. And good, as I was talking about in the previous question, good source data is the key. And these ongoing conversations with BEA and Census have allowed us to incorporate their thinking into our estimates. And we've been very careful to document all of this. Any changes that we've made, we've put out on our website, in our technical notes, in Q&As. And I think transparency is a big part of the story so far with what we've done. I think it also just goes back to needing to make long-term investments. You know, people have asked, well, how are you vis-a-vis where you were in 2008 and 9 with the financial crisis? And we're in a much better shape, thanks to things like Census's earlier release of advanced indicators, where we now have 3 months of data for wholesale and retail inventories and trade. We're also getting 3 months of data from Customs and Border Patrol on international travelers. So these things have, underlying before we get to COVID, raised the quality of our data, and that's paying big dividends in this period where there's so much change going on. We've also capitalized on long-term investments in private sector and big data. For several years, BEA has been buying monthly credit card data and using it to buttress our estimates. Well, we were able to add on daily credit card data in a very short period and had that available for putting out our preliminary estimate. We have a working paper here that shows the patterns within the months of February and March for consumer spending. So that has also paid big dividends. And then we've had to start identifying how government legislation under the CARES Act and other programs is going to figure into the national income and product accounts. And our team worked incredibly hard to put together a paper that covers all of the programs in the CARES Act that we put out with our first quarter GDP estimate. So other analysts can think ahead as to how these programs will impact personal income and second quarter GDP. So I think this working with our partners, using alternative data that we've been investing in, and then I can't state enough the importance of transparency and having good documentation. If you go to our website on the front page, you can find a link to our COVID-19 recovery page that has all of this information in one place.
That is fantastic. I think transparency like that is just, for researchers, for our state users, that's just so essential. Bill, what is your perspective? And I know I'm going to have a follow-up for you. So.
Okay, very good, very good. Yeah, this is a particularly hard session for me, given that Mike knows everything that's going on inside BLS. Let me not talk about response rates, since I've already mentioned those, and let me go to some puzzles. I think this will interest people. I was telling a colleague of mine, you know, Julie Hatch-Maxfield very well, your successor. I told her that this period of time would be the source of at least 1,000 PhD dissertations, just to kind of understand what we did and what has happened. So let me just take the period from the middle of March to the end of March, a 2-week period that will be heavily studied by scholars in the future. We were in the process of trying to figure out what happened to hours during that period of time. Now, why would we want to know that? Why would we want to know what happened to hours? Well, if you're doing labor productivity estimates, which the Bureau does, then you have to know the number of hours that are worked in order to divide that number of hours into the amount of output, which comes from BEA, to get the amount of output per worker, which is the fundamental concept of productivity. But the truth of the matter is, in the last 2 weeks of March, we didn't know how many workers had dropped off the system. So we didn't know what kind of an estimate of hours we were going to do. So our productivity people did something very innovative. They've never done this before, and I hope they continue to do it. They discovered in the what are called continuing claims data set of the UI system that's maintained by the Employment and Training Administration at the Department of Labor. They discovered, thanks to some real good detective work, that those claims are broken out by industrial classification, by gender, by a lot of regional variables. Well, they used those as a way to calibrate their changes in hours, moved that UI calibration formulas, which was just developed over a couple of weeks period, back into the productivity estimates and came up with an estimate of hours changed between the middle of March and the end of March. I thought that was just extraordinary. We also have a model in the Bureau that is known by some, but not by many. It's called the birth-death model. And we maintain that model because a lot of firms come in that are created that we don't actually survey. So we know that certain firms, certain periods of time are more fruitful for firms being created. Certain periods of time are more fruitful for firms dying. So I hate to use the word die, but going out of existence. So we have to estimate the number of firms that are being created or the number of firms that are going out of existence. And it's particularly important when you're at a turning point in the economy like we are, or like we were in the March to mid-April time period. So our birth-death model was just extraordinary. Again, we used innovative data sources, including the UI data sets, to give us a sense of what was happening inside each industry so that we could come up with a better adjustment to this birth-death model. Why is that important? Because the result of the model is an adjustment up or down in the total employment that we've done. I think the work that we've done on the price side has just been really, really productive, using these innovative collection methods that I hinted at earlier, video collection, where we have a vendor hold up a product in front of a video screen and turn it this way and turn it that way, just like we would if the collector went into the store and physically held the product or looked at it, observed it to get the quality changes. Now, one of the areas that we've not been able to get the vendor to hold up the item and show us is in diamonds. They're not showing us diamonds. And it is amazing, and many people may know this, but diamonds are a big input to a lot of other price indexes. So if you're a aficionado of our diamond index, you have noticed already that we suppressed all of the diamond entries this past month because we couldn't get anybody to hold the diamonds up.
Wow.
So it's little stories like that. We have, and just one more thing. Oh yes, I do want to talk about the classification problem that you mentioned. So one of the questions that we ask in the current population survey, do you have a job and are you currently at work? And some people say, I do have a job, but I'm not currently at work. Now that could be for a lot of reasons. They could be on strike, they could be sick, they could be on vacation. A lot of people are, anyone who's taken a vacation in the last couple of years, and there are 5 or 6 people in the United States who've done that, then they know that they have a job, but they're not at work. What we saw in April was an amazing number of people who could not give us a reason for why they were at home, but they had a job. And now we would normally classify those people as furloughed, and therefore those people, and we had about 8 million of them, go into the population of the unemployed, because if you're furloughed, you're not working. Even if you have a job and you're not working, remember our survey says, are you working or have you been looking for? So it's a work survey. Well, we were not able to classify those people in that way. So we know we have millions of people who have a job and they're not working, but we were not able to classify them as furloughed. So if you included those people, the unemployment rate would be about 2 percentage points higher than the official rate, which is U3. Again, we saw that problem in the May report. It was a lot less in terms of numbers, but it was certainly there. And again, it would have raised the unemployment rate by about 1.5 percentage points. We've totally documented this. You can read about it on our website. We're totally transparent. And people come up to me, not on the street, but at least not yet, and ask me, well, why didn't you make that adjustment? You know what's going on there. Why don't you just go ahead and make the adjustment? And I want to make this perfectly clear to everybody. We don't go in and Monday quarterback the CPS results. If we started to do that, everybody would have an opinion about what we ought to adjust. So we take the results as they come to us, warts and all. Now, this has not been a problem before, and we're working with Census. Census fields this survey. We're working with Census to see if we can find some instructions that will allow the folks who do the counting and do the interviews to be better able to discern this population and categorize them as furloughed. So these are problems which we're not going to have once we're out of the pandemic. We won't have these mysterious drops in employment. We won't have these mysterious pockets of people who are not in the labor force. They want a job and they're just hanging out not in the labor force. There are millions of them. It's safer there than trying to look for a job right now. And as I say, it's going to result in thousands of dissertations, probably not very good ones, but.
So I did say I'd have a follow-up question, but rather than a question, I wanted to make a couple of comments that may be of interest to the audience. One of the things that I think is going to be useful to look at in the future is how the birth-death model behaved during this period of time when you get the new numbers next year.
Right.
Because there were quite a few adjustments based on the performance of the birth-death model at the turning point of the Great Recession. So, and I know improvements have been made over time. So I think it'll be a really, useful test of how did we do at this particular turning point. I hadn't heard of the thing about taking the pictures. I think that's fascinating. I would encourage you to give Joe Reisinger at Premise, or who used to be at Premise, a phone call, because he ran the CPI internationally, where they hired folks to go out and take pictures of products and then record the prices. But the sort of the bigger point that I want to make, which I think is really interesting given measurement issues, is that one of the things we found with the folks that are employed but absent is that a pretty high share of those folks seem to be self-employed, which I think feeds into that whole importance of contingent work, self-employed contract work, and how we classify those folks. And I know those are issues that Census and BLS and BEA have been very interested in terms of how do we actually capture the folks who are not traditional wage and salary workers.
We do have questions which we fielded this month, and we'll report results this next month. We fielded in May, report probably later this month, that are follow-up questions, COVID related, on your work status. So we added 5 questions to the CPS. Those were a special fielding of those. And so we hope to have more insights as to reasons why you're at home. A lot of good questions here that the policymakers and the general public need to know about.
So Ron, let me turn to you. What is your perspective on data quality and kind of some of the challenges that you're facing?
So let me say there's a couple things. So let me talk about a thing that Mary said, and that's the importance of long-term investments. So, you need to have certain core measurement capability in place to handle any blips in in economic activity. And I think that we've probably underinvested in some of that stuff in the past, and that we need to address that. Included in that is source data improvement. So if you talk to folks inside companies, especially, everybody's a bigger consumer of Amazon now than they were before the pandemic. They saw big changes really fast. So they saw some products go away. Nobody bought pants during the pandemic, right? Okay, but people were buying toilet paper. So clearly a pandemic downturn is different than a financial crisis downturn. I mean, all these things are different. The ability to see, what's happening to spending, what companies, the reaction of the business sector to this was different than, so you just had complete decimation of hospitality and that sort of stuff. That's way different than what happened in the financial crisis. So I think being able to have that granularity, being able to know, what your baseline really looks like really clearly, and see as soon as that stuff starts deviating. So I think we have a lot of work to do with working with the private sector to tap into some of these other data sources to do a better job at measurement. Again, you've all heard me say this before. I'll say it again. This is not the private sector's job. Okay. First of all, I don't think we should trust for-profit organizations with economic and social measurement. They have an incentive to make the numbers look. You trust them no better than you trust political figures. This has to be apolitical. It has to be there has to be no pecuniary gain to producing statistics. But they do sit on the bulk of the data that are useful for our enterprise here, and we need to find ways to tap into that and to use for official statistics. So I think this is showing that in spades. So we're going to have to increase the cadence of those conversations, I think. But I think we've learned several things. We've learned that we can do things, the Census Bureau and VLS and BEA are relatively conservative organizations. When we would talk as leadership, to staff running surveys to say, hey, why don't we use email to go out and get people? Oh, email's not, well, now we know email actually works. Okay, now it works pretty good. In fact, at least on the business side, our respondents actually prefer to be contacted via email. So I think we're learning some things that maybe we just didn't allow ourselves to learn before, but we've now learned because of the importance of doing it quickly. But I think also the notion that you got to have different looks at these things. When something changes, you are going to have issues like with the birth death model or something like that, and you got to have some other ways of looking at the problem. So having the household surveys, you can't rely on just one set of statistics to look at what's happening with the economy. And so what was the other thing I was going to say on this issue?
Ron, can I just not push back, but just identify one stream of data or one concern? Both you and Mary mentioned alternative data, which I love. I mean, we've been involved in this for a long time. But so much of the economic collapse affected small businesses.
Yep.
To what extent do we have good sources of alternative, readily available administrative data from small businesses as opposed to, say, the large credit card companies? Is that a fruitful avenue for testing some of these models?
So I think on the small business side, you got, obviously there's some, there's the payroll companies that might service their payroll. There's the Intuit or something like that, the QuickBooks to look at their receipts. You can get their bank account data. So, JP Morgan Chase has information on small businesses. But again, you got to triangulate these from different sources. So I think something, why did we do a small business poll survey, not a big business poll survey? Well, because the big businesses are in our other measurement activities, right? Small business was more the blind spot. And we know from past things that young small businesses on turning points are an important thing to be looking at. Right. So that's why we wanted to go after that. So I think it's, this is not a, one size fits all thing. You got to come at this from different perspectives and then triangulate all that information to get a clear picture of what's going on. So this is, the alternative data is not that you're not going to do surveys anymore. It's that right. You're going to use those as your sort of core baseline amount of information. And then when things go haywire, you're going to do a survey to figure out what's making it go haywire. And one thing that we did learn with the small business poll survey, and I think they're going to add this to the household poll survey, is we put a free form text box at the end, said, tell us about your experience during the pandemic. And businesses want to tell the government what's going on. And so I don't have the slides here, but you see all sorts of interesting things about what they're concerned about. And, they're concerned about PPP and all the, so it's interesting that our going in assumption before was that, businesses only want to give you the numbers and, clearly not. I think that businesses are people too. and this pandemic is affecting everybody in different ways. And I think there's probably some useful information out there that you could glean from some more free form, survey questions that sort of point you to where to go look.
Sure.
So.
Great. So keeping an eye on the clock, because we also want to take in some questions from the audience. And I just want everyone who's submitting questions to realize that we are taking a look at the what's coming into the chat boxes. So what we had planned on doing was turning it to Q&A with the audience at about 4:40. So that gives us about 8 minutes left. I actually had 2 questions left, but I'm going to sort of combine them in a free-for-all, if you will, with the 3 of you. One part of the question was just the fact that we know that state budgets suffer mightily when unemployment rates, when the economy is in such undergoing such hard times. And I think there's probably a concern on the part of folks in the audience, our state partners, in terms of what's the impact of the reduction in state budgets, state tax revenues, without, say, a federal bailout. What's going to be the impact on the whole Fed-state programs? And I think that's an important question that sort of as the derivative effect of state budget problems, there may be then problems with our whole data collection enterprise. But the other, and I'll let you comment on that, but the other is, to the extent that you haven't mentioned an innovation, and you've talked a lot about the ones you've introduced, like the Pulse programs, or the, I'm still fascinated by the taking of the pictures of vendor products, Bill. Are there other innovations that you'd like to sort of get on the table? And then once I've given you a chance to kind of chat on those two questions, why don't we then turn to questions from the audience? Why don't we start with you, Ron, and then we'll go to Mary and Bill.
Well, so obviously, we are concerned. So like BLS, we do get data from the states. And in the past, various things have caused disruptions to that flow. And so, I think from a different perspective, this is why you don't want to have all your, eggs in one basket too, right? From a measurement perspective. But I think that, given that the partnership of the states with the federal stat agencies is beneficial to both sides, we obviously hope that states can prioritize at least some of the funding to make sure that those things continue, because when the states are having tough economic times, the last thing you want to do is cut off all your intelligence on your economic data. So, hopefully that doesn't come to pass. I don't think we've seen any issues so far. So hopefully that'll turn around. I think, we've experienced, especially with the decennial, a huge disruption, not because of the economy per se, but because of COVID, with our ability to work with state and local partners. And so I think that's, it's probably, I haven't run the regression and teased out the marginal impact on our response rates or any increase in the cost that might generate. But I think that is a big factor. And so, I don't know a way to fix that for the COVID environment. But, as we go forward, maybe to Bill's, hundreds of dissertations, one of the things that people could look at is how various components of this larger system that we have that contributes to economic and social statistics in our country, how the impact on different components of that during this crisis impacted data quality, impacted the costs and productivity of doing things. But right now I don't think that we know much about that. But we know that there probably is something, and we're doing what we can to mitigate it in real time. But there's only so much you can do when people have to stay home and that sort of stuff. So,
Mary?
Yeah, for BEA, we rely heavily on the data that Census and BLS collect from state and local governments. The quarterly census of employment and wages is foundational to our work to produce state GDP. So this will impact us, but not more, I don't know, indirect or directly. It's a big source of concern and importance to BEA. Let me talk a bit about some new products since you gave me that opening. And on the regional side, we've mentioned county GDP. We have also put out state data on recreation, outdoor recreation for the state GDP, including by activities such as fishing or skiing. And we had prototype statistics come out last fall. We've been taking comments and improving them, and we'll have our first official statistics out for state outdoor recreation this fall. We also, in terms of sectoral work, on Tuesday, we put out national statistics on the ocean economy in partnership with NOAA. So this was our first foray into measuring the ocean economy, and we're going to continue to build on that in working with NOAA over the years. So that's something to look forward to. And then the final thing that I'm going to mention is work that BEA has been doing to measure the distribution of income and look at how income affects different groups of households. And in March, we put out our first prototype estimates for 2007 to 16. And you can measure how American households share in growth tied to our national accounts, so you'll be able to monitor changes over time. So we're collecting feedback. We had a very robust discussion at our last virtual advisory committee meeting. And over the next few months, we're improving these statistics, and we'll also be extending them from 2016 to 18 and releasing the first official statistics by BEA on income distribution in December. So that's a sampling of the things we have on our plate for new products.
So with the income distribution statistics, what sort of demographics are you going to be able to represent?
So we don't have demographic data in the national accounts, and that's not part of the initial look. I don't believe that's on our near-term horizon. We are looking at how we might break out by states. And that isn't for December, but down the road, we would like to be able to put out distribution at the state level in the framework of income, the distribution of national income.
Okay, so it would really be more of a geographic as opposed to, say, anything based on education or head of household, race, ethnicity, things like that.
The census looks at income distribution and has that kind of, you can get that out of their statistics. Ours are focusing on linking it to the national accounts.
Gotcha, okay. Bill, what is your perspective? I kind of loaded two questions here. One on just Fed-state relationships in the area of declining state budgets or potential Fed budgets, but also just a chance to talk about any other innovations you've hadn't had a chance to mention.
Yeah, just a quick comment on Fed state. I mean, we don't really know what's going to happen. It could be that the income tax revenues at the state level will hold up, since those are focused on folks who are probably teleworking and still getting income more than anything else. I'm worried about the sales tax component, which is highly volatile during any kind of a cycle. So we'll just have to see how the states experience their revenue cycle to know whether or not our Fed state programs are in trouble. However, if they are in trouble, I think we have a record here in the past 2 months of what that trouble could look like, because those Fed state programs were heavily challenged by COVID. It was not a revenue thing, it was a health thing. And so just take that track record and extrapolate it, and you'll kind of get a good sense of what we're up against. On the innovation side, very quickly, I'll just do kind of two buckets. First off, I'm about to get a report from the Committee on National Statistics of the National Academy of Sciences on our contingent survey. So once we get that recommendation, which is due any day, then we're going to make some big changes. Real good news, we got funding to do the contingent work survey every other year. So we'll be doing it now as opposed to every 10 years, every other year. So that'll be good. We started 2 new panels as CNStat, one on retail trade, which is a crucial matter because retail trade has changed so dramatically. So with the Census Bureau, we are commissioning a wonderful panel to take a year or so to look at retail trade. The other one is a panel on the CPI. We have not done a big panel on CPI reform since the 2002 CNStat panel. It's way overdue. Where I'm putting so much emphasis on price indexes. It's not visible yet, but a lot of my energy, a lot of our energy is there. And on price indexes, let me just tell you a story. The sampling frame for a lot of the consumer price indexes happens to be the consumer expenditure survey. And I think that's kind of not gotten the attention it should have gotten over the years. So we're spending a lot of time modernizing, thinking outside the box on the consumer expenditure survey. You'll hear some pretty radical things come out of BLS in the next year or so. But one of them is we're going to try to get away from the paper diaries, the diaries that are supposed to be maintained by the households on what did they spend, how much did they spend, and go to 2 new systems. One's an online system, which is obvious. You just go there and it's so much easier. The other one is an app that people will take around on their cell phones, and as they go shopping, they'll simply click off what they're buying, and those results will be sent then to BLS. We're going to make a lot of changes to that program, and I think we're going to try to do a lot more with our electronic data centers for the collection of data, both at the price level and at the employment level.
So, Bill, you were breaking up just a little bit, just to make sure everyone heard. The CNStat panel that's going to be coming out with recommendations is on the contingent worker survey, which kind of goes back to that issue that we were talking a little bit about before, which is how do we capture people who are not traditional wage and salary workers? So we're at that point now where we'd like to open it up to questions. And I know one question that has gotten a little bit of play here in the chat window is disclosure avoidance and what kind of changes have taken place with respect to disclosure avoidance by Census. So Ron, I think you even may have gotten a private message on your chat window if you saw it. Could you spend a couple minutes just talking about what sorts of innovations and changes are taking place in this arena?
So certainly. So as many people know, we made a decision to modernize disclosure avoidance for the decennial census, using some of the same tools that we've used for our longitudinal player data products in the past, especially our on the map application, as well as some of the other newer products that we've put out, our post-secondary employment outcomes data products, where we have data from universities and we then look at people's labor market outcome 1, 5, and 10 years out. We've also just released a similar product with folks who have left the Army, so called our Veterans Employment Outcome. So the disclosure avoidance method and all of those things is differential privacy, and people love it on the map in the PSEO and the VEO, but because they had something else in the past, their data users are very concerned that they won't be able to have the same level of granularity and accuracy as they had before. But the reason we're doing this is essentially the 2010 census was published in the clear, if you will. So there's even more data out there now for people to be able to do a reconstruction or re-identification attack to the data. So we have to do something. We've released, working with SanStat, we did a conference last December on where folks looked at some demonstration products. We found a number of issues about the usability of those, and we've made a number of improvements and corrections. We continue to work with folks, but I think people would like to see more demo products come out. It's kind of a bandwidth issue on our side. Do we have the people to produce them and review them and get them out, and then to work with people on the other side versus all the other work that staff has to do. So we're working on it. I don't have the most latest update. I'm going to talk with the team next week. But this is something we're trying to optimize that trade-off between privacy and accuracy as best we can for the 2020 census. The 2020 census is by far the most disclosive product. We're releasing detailed age, race, sex, by detailed geography. The detailed geography is really what's the thing that hurts you from a privacy perspective. Our other products are less impacted by that, but they also, ACS is at a higher level of geography, but it has more details in it. So, we are doing work on that. So, working on the 2022 economic census to modernize its disclosure avoidance. Especially on our business side, most of these things will be, I think, a boon to data users because we'll be able to publish more data. Instead of using self-suppression and other things. We have been using noise in some of our business data products. This is just another more formal way of applying noise. So, this is a continuing project, and we need feedback from users. Users tend to be much more vocal than privacy advocates, but the privacy advocates have the law on their side, and so. Sure.
Ron, if I could follow up just with a general question, this kind of affects, I think, the products for all three of you. But as a very specific example that I think a lot of our data users in this forum might be concerned about is, as an example with county business patterns, one of the things that we discovered with the change in suppression rules is it has become harder to then impute missing cells for, say, bringing the data down for local estimates. And I'm wondering if, in general, is there any sort of room in the federal system to think about new ways of creating local databases from the federal databases where you add more noise and you get more local detail than we have now? Is that something with modeling and with?
So I think essentially that's what we've been able to do with like on the map and stuff like that. You can do the local, customizable statistics from that because you've added the noise. I think that, this is where data users are a very heterogeneous group. Some are very good at being able to use data that's had statistical noise added to it and drawing the right inference, and others are less good at that. And I think this is, working with, users of different levels of sophistication on this is something that the agencies are going to have to get better at. This is very reminiscent of when we went from the from the long form census to the ACS, right? So the long form census at a 1 in 6 sampling rate, massive sampling rate, right? So, but it was a sample, okay, and it had sampling error, but users treated it as if it did not. And when you went to something that was a bit more noisy, you know, the 3 and 5 year data products from the ACS, and you sort of forced them to think about that, that was a big change for a lot of users, right? Sure. And so, yeah, I think this is a little bit similar to that, but it, you know, we live in a world where the detailed, you know, barely fuzzed micro data sets that the agencies produced in the past that's just not, we can't do that anymore. So
right. Bill, we did get a question across the transom, and it's actually something that I was heavily involved in before I left the Bureau, is whether or not we're going to, you guys are going to be able to produce OES time series. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sort of what is the current status? When I left, the research is far along in terms of showing proof of concept. And I believe that work has continued.
It does. We may have something to tell this group at some point in this year. I mean, so the conditions that we're working under right now kind of interrupted that work, but it would be wonderful if we had it, because a time series that in OES would be more matchable to other time series, right? And right now you have to take the annual series and just kind of make it up. I will point out that there is a time series now in the National Longitudinal Surveys that does follow occupations. It follows what people are doing, and I think that could be even more rigorously mined, and then matching that with some other series in the health area, which has some designators for occupation. The Dartmouth series, for example. If I could just expand on this, you know a lot more about the OES than I do. I haven't quite studied up on it, but part of the thing that we're trying to do, Mary made a mention of it, is the Evidence Act, is to create data, and that creating of data will require us to match and merge data sets from different agencies, academic projects, private sector, alternative data sets. And clearly here is one that we're going to want to do. We discussed this extensively the day before yesterday at the BLS automation seminar, and hopefully that will inspire my staff and the academic world to come up with ways in which we can create these merged data sets to follow people's occupations as the world of work changes.
Excellent. And one of the things I remember from the research on the time series that the folks in the audience might find pretty exciting is that when the time series does come out, their plan is to impute occupational staffing patterns back to the entire QCEW. So it's going to give a lot more local detail, which kind of follows on Ron's point about how do you use modeling or noise in order to expand the kind of local products that that the folks working in the States can really benefit from. So I think, Ken, you had I saw a question in the chat room, and we'll end with this. How can C2ER and LMI, the LMI Institute, help the agencies in terms of enhancing your product development and dissemination efforts? I know that based on my conversations with LMI folks, they're very interested in mapping tools, as well as producing, for example, cost of living price indexes. They're very involved with the development of products at the LMI at the state level. So I think the general question is, what kind of partnerships can we create out of this?
Just let me take a stab at that. The BLS just produced new state productivity and cost estimates. We're going to be producing state estimates at JOLTS, metropolitan area estimates. I think the LMI shops, the LMI organizations really help us in scrutinizing what we're producing and giving us feedback on that, because that's the direction we want to go. I want to follow Ron's lead in granularity and quality at the same time. That's our future for sure.
That's fantastic. Mary, Ron, any last words? I've got a few concluding things to end the conference.
Mike, just want to thank you for including us and really for the organizations that have given us input on specific things like county GDP, as well as pushing DEA and the federal statistical system towards more granularity and detail. That's a good thing, so keep it up.
Excellent.
And I would just add, you know, that granular in detail only happens if there's good source data to start with. So, you know, anything that we can do to improve and increase the source data that we have available to produce the statistics will help. So.
Well, and I want to thank the three of you both for being here, but also just, I know you have spent a lifetime just thinking about ways in which we can improve the quality of the data that we have, both at the federal level, at the regional level, the state and local level. So it's a great partnership, and I applaud all the efforts.